Welcome to a property in Queensland, Nick, and this story has been in the making for more than half a century.
Certainly has, Andrew. It's a story of a mixed enterprise, the story of a cow cocky who loved his trees.
It was the early 1960s on Queensland's central coast when a young Les Bettine purchased a patch of land called Boomerang.
This is the pack horse that Les used to ride here every week from home.
Yeah.
And then he'd bring all his supplies and everything on the horse.
Yes.
The plan was to run cattle, only problem was Boomerang was completely overgrown. Les's sister Hazel remembers the day she first laid eyes on the property.
I rode up here with a mob of cattle on horseback and I helped bring them up from down home, a mob of ballies. Yeah, you couldn't even see out the hut window here. It was just all undergrowth and young trees.
The first few years was a tough toil, but eventually, working single-handedly, Les built a fence around the entire property and cleared just enough trees to allow the first of his cattle to graze.
So as Les could run his cattle on this property, he had to thin out all the scrawny, scrubby trees, and he simply did that by ring barking them, and the remnants of that remain today.
The interesting thing about the clearing operation, though, and the thing that made Les a bit of a pioneer, is the fact that he didn't take them all. The best trees were left standing.
Now, I have heard him quoted saying he never meant to leave so many trees, just couldn't bring himself to kill a good one. And I think that's reflected across the property, in that we have a wide space, where the timber is good, wide space, well-grown trees.
Boomerang is now the perfect example of how timber and cattle can go hand in hand in this part of the world.
So, Sean, this is the neighbouring block and left pretty much in its natural state, I guess, much how Les would have found his bit of ground when he turned up 50-odd years ago.
Yes, typically after the early impacts of European settlement and unmanaged state, it became overgrown and very thick, and you can see very little.
That's the point, I guess, is very scrubby and closed in.
Now the property, complete with Les's hut, is managed by Private Forestry Services Queensland, a not-for-profit group which assists landowners to manage their own bush.
Although these days much of Boomerang's management has been taken care of, thanks to Les.
All right, so Bill, this is a good demonstration of how things grow if you take the time and clear the ground around them. This big spotty here, mate, is growing at a rate.
He is, Andrew. We measured that tree about 6-7 months ago and he was 81.5 centimetres. Now, it's been a pretty good year and he's obviously an exceptional stick and there's no competition, but he's put on 2.5 centimetres in that time. When that tree, in a girder class, is probably worth $200, $250 a cube.
So he's just sitting there putting money on?
He is. It's like compound interest. If you cash your capital in too early, you're missing out. So centimetre, 2 centimetres, 3 centimetres on a big tree is a lot more volume than the same growth rate on a little tree. So don't cash them in too early, take them out when they're finished growing, and he hasn't finished growing.
There's some 3 million hectares of privately owned land in the southern Queensland area which could be managed for both grazing and timber. It's Private Forestry Services Queensland hope more landowners will see the potential.
Private Forestry Services Queensland is a not-for-profit group aiming to educate and assist landowners to manage their trees.
The management technique which works best is to do what Les did 50 years ago and thin out all the smaller trees, giving the bigger trees space to grow. It's a simple philosophy, but Boomerang demonstrates just how well it works.
Clearly, he had in mind that this was what he was going to grow. Even though he might have done it inadvertently, but he had good intuition.